Hi, my name is Terri Lynn Champion. My birth name was Walker, but I was also named Sherry Denise Williams when I was born. I was born October 12th, 1963, makes me 56 years old, and I was around 3 months old when my parents adopted me. And they adopted me from the Children's Aid Society of Philadelphia, which is an orphanage in Philly. At that time, they kept kids that were waiting to be adopted. But I didn't find out that I was adopted until I was 12. My earliest childhood memories were being picked up by my dad. I love to sit on my father's lap. There are countless pictures of me at 2 and 3 and 4 sitting on my dad's lap, running to the corner to have him pick me up and carry me home. Those were some great memories of my time with my parents. And then I guess one other one would be being dressed up like my mom for Easter. So, yes, early good memories. Growing up, emotionally, I always felt as though I didn't fit in. I always felt like I just couldn't find a niche, so to speak. I loved my parents, loved being cared for and loved on and played with, but intrinsically something just didn't click for me. I'm still trying to find it. My relationship with my family, it was good. I was the only child for 4 years, so I got a lot more toys. Christmas was huge at our house. Big giant Christmas tree, angels on the top, gifts all over the place. One of my favorite Christmas presents was a big, ginormous pink and white panda bear. It was huge. He was like life size. And that was one of my favorite gifts. So growing up as a child, I pretty much was just loved and cared for until I was 4. And then my parents bring home a brother for me. Didn't know if we were going to give him back or not because I didn't know what he was here for. But they did not want me to grow up as an only child. So they felt a need to increase the family by 1. And then I guess I felt like other kids. I felt like I had to compete now because there was someone else here that was taking the time, taking the attention and all of that. And I had to find my place again. And it was hard. It's hard being there. The feelings that I had of not fitting in or belonging, they pretty much were there even before I found out that I was adopted. Being an only child for 4 years, I always thought that I was the only one. This made sense. And then when he comes along, I'm like, well, maybe this isn't right. Maybe there's something not right here. Because now that I'm thinking back about it, I always wondered if I was going to be sent away. Because here they bring someone else in. Now he's getting all the attention and the fanfare, and I'm over here. And I do recall, now that I'm talking about it, one day wondering if they were going to give me away. And I remember that at a birthday party. It was his first birthday, and so I was 5. And my mom and dad had this weird looking table. It was a table with a circle in the middle cut out with a little baby seat, and that's where you sat. And he had a cake and hats and birthday parties and stuff and all these people. And I remember I looked at this picture recently, And I can remember what I was thinking. And it was that they were going to give me away to somebody. And that's a strange feeling to have, because maybe they didn't want me anymore because now he's here. There was this part of me that always felt disconnected, that they liked him more than me. He's cuter, because now, you know, a 1-year-old certainly is a lot cuter than a 5-year-old. And it was, maybe they just didn't want me and were gonna send me somewhere else. I always did think that when I was a kid. When I first found out I was adopted, my brother and I were on our way to school. We were catching the school bus, and somehow or another, as we always did, we would get into some argument. I couldn't tell you what we argued about to this day. Well, anyway, we got into a little tussle. I grabbed his backpack. I threw his backpack down the sewer. And the next thing he hollers out, "I'm telling you, you're adopted." I'm what? Like, it's bewilderment on my face. Like, okay, whatever. So I go to school and think anything of it. I come home, do my chores, my homework and all that. And I remember going up into my mom's office, and I sat in the chair and I was crying. And I said, "Mom, am I adopted?" And she goes, "Why did you want to know?" And I said, "Because he told me that I was adopted." And I remember it was like a silence. And she said, "Well, yes, you're adopted. And it's not that we didn't want you. We wanted you, and we needed you in our life, in our family. And we chose you because you looked like us, and we knew you would grow up to look like us." And that was when I found out. I was around 12 years old. The feelings that I had at the time were shock, I suppose, because I didn't know what it meant. They never sat me down at 4 and 5 and 6 and told me that I was adopted. I didn't know. I thought I came like any other kid. And so I looked for people to talk to maybe help guide me through what this all meant. And I went to my church, and I talked to the youth person in charge, and I said, I just found out I was adopted. And they said some hurtful things to me. They said I was ungrateful, and they said that I didn't appreciate God for my life and everything else. And it sent me into a place of low self-esteem at that point, because I didn't think I fit in anywhere. And little do they know that they were the cause of the reason why I suffered with low self-esteem for quite a while. The catch to the whole thing about the youth person was that they were friends of my parents, and they knew I was adopted and treated me as if I was a nothing and that I didn't matter. And that hurt very much so. I never talked to my parents about it ever again. Not as a child anyway. It wasn't until I was around 49 years old that I expressed to my family that I would like to pursue finding my biological family. And my mother, I remember asking me, she asked me why. And I said, well, I'd just like to know to see what kind of health issues I would have. And she said, okay. But I can tell she was quite offended by my choice to want to know. And that was the last time I ever mentioned it to them. I think the reason that I didn't say any more to them was because I didn't want to hurt their feelings. And I didn't want them to think that I was ungrateful for the life that they had given me, for the opportunities that they have afforded me. I didn't want them to feel that they didn't matter to me. So I never brought it up again. The silence affected me in a way that I sought other people to talk to. I looked for other people. If I heard that someone was adopted, I would interject a bit of my story. If I read about it in a newspaper or a magazine or a book, it just ignited something in me. It was like a spark that made me feel like I found a family, I found a connection, I found a group that could understand what I was feeling and thinking, and the emotional upturns and the ebbs and flows of life. I felt like I found people who knew. And yet, at the same time, on the back end, I felt like I betrayed my family by wanting to know, by connecting with other people who were adopted. I participated in the adoption of a very special young lady in my life, and I cried the entire ceremony because I wondered if this is what my ceremony was like when I was growing up. And emotionally, it's been a roller coaster, to say the least. My parents went to two different churches. My mother went to one church, my dad went to another church, and they were married for 56 years. So, and it worked out well. Up until I was 12, I went to church with my mom. At the age of 12, they gave me a choice, and I'm a daddy's girl at heart. So I went to church with my father, and I loved it. I had a lot of friends there. My dad's mother was one of the founders of the church. And so it was almost meant to be. You're supposed to be there. This was my dad's church. Grew up in the church. I sang in the choir. I taught Bible study. I just loved it. Church and God are a foundational piece of my life. And if for nothing else, I thank my parents for giving me that. So I find out that I was adopted when I was 12 years old. However, prior to that, when I was 10, this person from my church would come over a lot, all the time, and they began to violate me in ways that were inappropriate, forcing me to do sexual acts with them and to them, and went on for a long time. And I didn't realize how traumatic it was until I was 40 years old. So for 30 years, I kept this secret. So imagine this happens at 10, I find out at 12, and I'm supposed to figure this whole thing out by myself. And I struggled with acceptance because when I was 14, I started to like my person that was attacking me. I started to like them. And I said, who does that? And when I finally told him that I liked him, and he said he didn't like me like that, we never spoke again. So from there, it sent me into a tailspin, if you will, of series of rejections in my life. And never really figured out how to recoup from that. How do you not face rejection in every area of life? And so that set off a particular tailspin of not so nice behavior from me, because I wanted to be accepted. I wanted people to want me. And I wanted to not only be wanted, but I also wanted to be needed. And it sent me into a quest to find people who fit those two categories. So I became a love addict. I didn't know that's what I was, but I was obsessed with having someone to love me and someone to need me, that I would relationship after relationship after relationship. Nothing sexual, just a need for a relationship. And that blew out of control, where it was obsessive and it was bad. I'm better now though. The reason why I didn't feel I could tell anyone, because I didn't think they'd believe me. A lot of females and men who go through abusive situations, from sexual trauma to any type of abuse, tend to not feel comfortable to talk about it because they don't feel that someone would believe them. There's a lot of women in particular who keep this a secret forever because they don't want their attacker to find out, or they're threatened in some way, or some relative knew about it. But in the African American culture, it's like what happens in the house stays in the house. And we sweep those things under the rug. We don't talk about what happened when you were 6. We don't talk about those things because it's almost pretending like it didn't happen. And because this was someone in the particular church, I knew that it would be hard for me to be believed. And so when I turned 40, I told my father and mother. And my father's words were, "Why did you wait so long to tell us?" My response, "Because I didn't think you would believe me." The response was quite different. My mother didn't comment. My father said, "How did you know we wouldn't have?" And I live with those words forever. I grew up in 1960s in a predominantly white community. My parents were the first Black people on our block, on our street. And so all of my babysitters to the right, to the left, Quinn, Hughes, Collins, they were my babysitters. And I thought that I fit in with them. I didn't think I was any different, and neither did they. And it, of course, wasn't until I grew older that I noticed that there was a difference. My childhood friends were white, and there were Black people coming in. I had some Black friends, but I went to a predominantly white school, and I always felt a connection to the white community. My one neighbor, bless her heart, I must have been about 4 years old. She came home one day from the market and she says, "Oh, look what I bought." And I go run over to the fence and I'm looking and I'm like, "You bought a brain?" She said, "No, it's cauliflower." I said, "You eat this?" And to this day, every time I see cauliflower, I always think of Miss Quinn. And it was funny, but I didn't think I was different. Recently, someone asked me, "Why do I identify as Black or African American?" And I said, "What do you mean?" And they said, "You really identify with a white community." And I said, "I don't understand what you mean." And she said, "Look at how you talk. You get along well with everyone, every culture of people, white, Asian, what have you." She said, "You should start filling out applications and saying that you're white." And I said, "Wow." And I told the person, I said, "I have never had anyone say that to me." She said, "But it's true." And then we just went on. And then I began to think about it, and I said, maybe ethnicity does not begin with the color of our skin, but as a famous reverend has said, it begins with the content of our character. So perhaps maybe we put a lot of emphasis on the exterior rather than what makes us who we are, and that being what's on the inside of us. Now, my black friends tend to think I don't fit in with them at all. They tend to think that I'm too white. I don't know where to fit in, honestly. So as you can tell, being adopted, this whole thing just is a mishmash of a whole bunch of stuff. Because my black friends don't think I'm black enough. My white friends think that I'm not white enough. So I don't know where to fit in. I think I should fit in with the people of England, honestly, because my first father has a high ethnic, Eurocentric English personality, family trait. When I went to England, I felt like I belonged there. And I said, I'll move here when I grow up. And I probably will one day, because I feel that that's where I fit in. And also, oddly enough, I feel like I fit in with the continent of Africa because I get invited there a lot. I went to Nigeria and I felt like I belonged there. And there's a little bit of Nigerian in according to my ancestry. And I went to Kenya, Nairobi, Kenya. And I just seemed to fit with them. They all want to adopt me. I don't think that there's any difference between transracial adoptees and adoptees of the same race. And I think the reason for that was, for myself, my parents enculturated me. They took me to museums, they took me to plays at the Academy of Music, they took me to theater. I remember being maybe 4 or 5, I want to say I was 4, and my mother dressed me up in this bouffant little suit with the little muffs where you put your hands in, and we're walking down Walnut Street in Philadelphia, which is the theater district, and my mother took me to see on stage the Yellow Submarine by the Beatles. I don't know any other African American black family who went to see that. And so I remember that so well. And so I'm like, wow, Mom. And she took me all dressed up and fancy to see the Nutcracker at the Academy of Music, which was the big theater downtown. And I'm like, okay, no black people do this. And so I wanted to try to be black. My father took me to my very first one and only rock concert. Well, it may have been R&B. I don't know what you call it. It was the Jackson 5. Okay, so I wanted to be black. And I kind of didn't fit in there with my black friends because they're like, you went to see the Jackson 5? Not some other group, the Delphonics or the Stylistics, but the Jackson 5. Yes, so I didn't fit in too well on either side. Now, having grown up and having had my own children, I too wanted to enculturate my children. So I took my children to the Academy of Music. No, we didn't see the Yellow Submarine. I took my children to the Art Museum and to the various things in Philadelphia, and also took my children, inner city black children, to England and Paris. So I wanted my children to experience that same enculturation that I had, but my children struggle with my being adopted and them trying to find their place as well, which is very, very hard for them to find. So I don't know if there's a difference. Maybe there is. My parents finding role models for me was certainly high on the list because both of my parents were very active in their church, in their churches respectively, and my father had a job. He worked for the U.S. Marine Corps as a civilian, and so there were always people that they were introducing me to. Their friends became aunt and uncles to us, and their children became my cousins. And so the family outside of my parents' siblings and their children had a host of friends who became aunt this, uncle that, cousin so-and-so. So I always had role models around. I always had people around me. And because I was a daddy's girl, I always wanted to follow behind my father. And when I got out of high school, I just knew I was going to go to the Marines. Because he was around Marines all the time, I was like, yes, this is going to be me. It's going to be a medic. This is going to be great. Needless to say, it didn't work out. But I wanted to follow behind the people who my father had around him. And then I became involved in administration and different jobs that I've had and so forth. So then I followed behind my mom. And she taught me everything I need to know about typing and secretarial skills and even how to run a stenographer machine. You know, the one you turn? Yeah. So I had a lot of role models. But I don't know if they helped me with identity or not. I think I had to work through that and find my place. And I'm still doing that. I struggled in high school. I didn't make all A's. I didn't make the honor roll. I had to go to summer school every semester until the 12th grade. And so school was hard for me. Whereas he made the National Honor Society. He was in this booklet of who's who of American high school students. He was great. He was a great kid. I didn't go to a four-year university right away from graduation. Went to community college. He went to a four-year HBCU school, majored in finance, did well. And I didn't get that opportunity. And so I always felt that my mom thought that he was better than me. And I felt that she thought that he was the greatest thing next to sliced bread. And so it put a strain on my mom and I, and it also put a strain on him and I, because we didn't get along, ever. And so, because I couldn't talk some of the lingo that my mom liked, and I just fell out of place. So I gravitated more to my father because Dad and I could talk the lingo of church. We could talk the lingo of theology. We could talk the lingo of the Bible, which is where my heart and my passion were. And it still is. Whereas I couldn't have those type of conversations with my mom. And it created a problem, or a little bit of tension for me, I think. In 1994, I had a conversation with my mom, and I kind of felt that my mother was jealous of me and my father's relationship. So I wrote my mom a letter, and I asked her how she felt about my dad and I and how close we are and that we can share. My mother wrote a letter back to me, and to paraphrase, it basically said she loved me and she was grateful that I was able to have a relationship with my father where there's so many young women that don't get to have that father-daughter relationship. And she valued and cherished what my father and I shared. And, I don't want to cry, but she was grateful have given me the opportunity to have such a love from a father like I had. And I'm grateful that she allowed me that opportunity. And in the letter, she stated that she knew that she really wasn't the motherly type, but she wanted to be a mother. And she apologized to me for not being the motherly type, and that she could not give me the motherly stuff, for lack of a better term, that other mothers give their daughters. And I realize why she said that now, but back then I didn't understand what that meant. What do you make of that when your mom says she doesn't have a motherly instinct? She told me that. And so I don't think that she grieved not having birthed children. I think she may have grieved not having the motherly instinct that she saw her sisters have. But I'm grateful to have had the opportunity to share with both her and my dad. The birth of my first child gave me a sense of family. By him and his sister being the only blood relatives that I have, I think I smothered them, I think, because in the back of my mind, and this, I've never shared this, in the back of my mind, I always thought that they were going to leave me and that I was going to be alone. Now that my children are grown, I feel that even more so now, that I'm going to be just left in some nursing home somewhere and nobody there to care for me. And I think that at that point, the cycle of rejection and abandonment would have come full circle for me. But it was a joyous experience. He was the cutest thing on 2 feet. And I always loved to dress him up, play with them, but I feel that at some point that they're going to leave me. The triggers of trauma would probably be when I found out that my father passed away. That opened an enormous floodgate of trauma, like the Hoover Dam. It just came pouring from everywhere. Because prior to my father's passing, everything was great. I thought I had 2 beautiful children. I was married to their father, but we did not stay married for whatever reason. I got remarried again, moved to West Virginia. Things were great. Came home. My mother had gotten cancer. She was doing well now. And then my dad goes. And I didn't understand why. And from there, it led back to the addiction of needing to have someone in my life. It led back to the love addiction in a worse way. I was like looking for anybody and anybody. And I realized I was doing it before I got way deep in. I went to therapy so that I would not fall back into that web of addiction that was so traumatic for me. I would stop it before it started, and that helped a lot. I found someone who was very competent in understanding the rejection that I had felt as being an adoptee, who understood the need for me to find and want to be loved and needed, understood that very well, and then gave me a book to read on how to stop all of those traumas when they do happen. And it's helped tremendously, as a matter of fact. So I'm not as bad as I was. I mean, I think I still, every once in a while, but I'm able to catch it before it gets any further along. I've always had thoughts of finding my first family. After I found out that my name was Sherry Denise Williams, and that they changed my name when I was given to them. But I didn't actively begin pursuing anything until I was 50 years old. I made a promise to myself that when I was 50, I was going to start the process. And a friend of mine in Philadelphia, a very affluent individual, has connections with the court. So they wrote a letter, they made a phone call, and did all these things, and they said they were sending me down to the orphans court in Philadelphia to get these and get whatever records they could find. So I filled out the paper, and it was almost a year later. It took so long, I don't know why, to get this letter in the mail. So here the letter is. I'm nervous. I'm like, oh my God, am I gonna find the information that I want? So I called a friend. I said, listen, I got the letter. Can you come with me while we open it? I said, sure. So we opened the letter together, and I was baffled. Like, deer in headlights, what am I reading here? And the letter said, dear Miss Champion, thank you for your inquiry. Here's the information, non-identifying information. Your birth mother was an African-American woman. She was Protestant. She was a waitress in a restaurant. She had a child before you. She graduated from high school. She had no health issues. Thank you so much. I couldn't wrap my head around why this is all I got. And I was angry because I'm like, well, do you have a name? Do you have, if there was a child before me, boy, girl, age, birthplace, something? She said, I'm sorry. Later, I guess maybe a month later, I go back and I'm like, can you give me information on a father? And she said, the mother listed no father for you. And I said, well, that's impossible. I could not get here without a father. So she goes back to the computer, scanning this and that. And she said, there's nothing. I said, you have no race, no age, no anything. She said, nothing. And she said, it's as if he didn't exist. I was angry by this point. And that day was the day I had the greatest epiphany of my entire life. I'm in my car. I'm 1 block from my home. I'm at 54th Street, right in front of the hospital. And I sit there, somewhat nervous to park or to get out, and I'm at a red light, and I hear a voice speak to me, and as if it was God sitting in my car, and he said, I'm your father. You have my blood in your veins. At that moment, I couldn't move. All the cars probably were beeping, but it was a wide enough street they could go around. And when I finally stopped crying, I parked my car and went into the house. To this day, I don't really know what to say about that. I get chills a little bit when I think about it. But then after that, I found this TV show, A Long Lost Family. And I wanted to be on the show. I said, they'll help me. I know these people will help me. I went through all of the process, the interviews, the questionnaires and all. They send me back. They send me an ancestry kit that I needed to take. I do the ancestry DNA thing, and several weeks go by, emails come, and then there's nothing there. The long lost people said, there's nothing we can do. Thank you so much for your inquiry. And then I start looking through the ancestry packet that they give me. Didn't really understand it all, except that I figured out that my ethnicity is primarily African descent and European. I don't know what to make of that, and I don't know how to follow the rest of it. So it just sits in my folder. And I said, maybe I should do it again, because maybe that's not right. But you can't be wrong with DNA, I suppose, right? So I don't know what to make of all of this. So that's what happened. I get a dead end and I hit a brick wall. How does it make me feel not to know about my birth family? Wow. I feel cheated. I feel cheated. I feel like abandoned in the worst way. Yes, my faith has been a grounding point for me. Yes, even people within my own faith circle who are very near and dear to me have told me that they too were adopted. And so I have that common bond with them. However, I personally feel like an anomaly. Like, how can I just be here and there not be something or someone that says, yes, I'm your second cousin from your 19th uncle that got married to your second aunt down the road. Something. I feel cheated because other people know who their birth family is or their first family. They know where to find them. They know how to find their cousins and their aunts and their grandmoms and them. I can't find anything. And so I feel very angry. I feel betrayed that in the orphan's court there was nothing but this letter that said she was a waitress. Really? Part of me wants to keep going, but then the other part of me says, do I really want to spend the money to do this only to come back to, oh, she was a waitress in a restaurant? Because it would cost me a lot of money to have the vaults open because it was a closed adoption in the 1960s. And I don't know, it would be a couple $1,000s because I would have to go through the Children's Aid Society, the orphanage, the courthouse, get an attorney probably involved. You know, probably can't do that alone. So is it worth me spending the money? Or do I, and I ask myself this question all the time, or do I just thank God for where I am? I don't know. But the cheated piece is huge. It's huge. I feel cheated. Adoptees, as we think about them, they struggle with identity. They struggle primarily with rejection because, of course, to adoptees out there, the number one question that we ask is, why didn't you want me? And the second question, kind of coupled with that, is, what was wrong with me? 90% of the time, there was probably nothing wrong with us. But they didn't want us for a variety of reasons. Probably the number one being economic. Conditions weren't conducive enough for them to care for us. They had too many kids already, space, or what have you. And so identity for adoptees is huge. Even though some are multi-ethnic adoptees, Asians with blacks or Asians with whites or whites with blacks, etc. There's always this question and this quest of, who am I? Where did I come from? Sure, we all know that we come from two people, a mother and a father, and they had us, and boop, here we go. But there's something else that we struggle with. And ultimately, our DNA leads us back to God. And so my book that I'm working on is called X, Memoirs of the Anonymous Me. And you're probably saying, what? X? What do you mean? Well, when you think about X, X in and of itself sounds real mysterious. Like X just has this feeling of some sort of a frightening sound. And yet when you think about what X does, X is a multiplier, and anything multiplied by itself duplicates itself. And so as an adoptee, we have a multitude of X's that we're trying to solve. We're trying to solve, okay, if we know nothing of our ethnicity, where did we come from? Like myself, I'm a mishmash of a whole bunch of stuff. And then I'm trying to solve for the X of the family nucleus that I was raised in. And then solve the X for my children who are still trying to figure out where they fit in to the whole nuance of myself. And so my book is a compilation of memoirs, some triumphs, some tragedies that I've gone through in life, but I write it through the lenses of biblical characters. Because Solomon once said, there's nothing new under the sun. And so nothing new is under the sun. And so in thinking about my book, the first question I ask is, have you ever wondered what God looked like? You ever wonder where he came from? Because the Bible says we're made in his image, then what does his image look like? Does his image look like me? Does his image look like you? Is he Asian? Is he black? Is he white? What image is God? And so I write from that perspective, but I spend a great deal of emphasis on chapter 2, which is about the life of Moses, who was adopted. Given up by his mother to save his life from the people who wanted to kill him, he's adopted into the house of the king. And he's given this royal treatment, and he's, sitting at the table eating with gold forks and all this fancy food that he can't explain. And yet he looks out the window only to see that that's his people outside. How does he deal with that? And I write from Moses' perspective, saying, how does he deal with that inner conflict of being adopted, but knowing that's his family out there? And lo and behold, writing this book has given me a tremendous appreciation for the people in the Bible who've had life experiences just like us. That have, there's been women that have been violated and yet not vindicated. There are people in the Bible, believe it or not, who were enablers. I myself was an enabler to someone in my family. And how did I deal with that? And then the closing chapter of my book is from my favorite biblical character in the entire Bible, and his name is Mephibosheth. He's a young man who was the son of Jonathan, David's best friend. He was the grandson of Saul, who tried to kill David. And as he was a young boy, he may have been about 4 or 5, there was a war that broke out, and his nurse, his aide, was carrying him, and she falls and drops him. Never goes back to pick him up. And Mephibosheth grows up in this barren place, trying to find his identity, trying to see where he fits in. Who am I? He could probably ask himself. And one day, David the king sends his servants to go find somebody who's left over from Saul's family that he could be nice to. And he goes and they find this boy, Mephibosheth, in this barren land, picks him up. Mephibosheth doesn't even feel worthy to be in his house. I can recall feeling like I wasn't worthy to be in my parents' house because they thought that my sibling was better than me. And Mephibosheth now is in front of the king, feeling unworthy. The king says, no, You're worthy to belong here. You belong here. Have a seat at my table and listen, Mephibosheth, you're never going to leave again. You'll always have a place. Leading me to conclude that even though Mephibosheth knew who his family was, he now has another family who was willing to adopt him and give him a life that he would not otherwise have had he been left in the place of barrenness. That's how I feel, that I would have been in a place of barrenness. I might not even have been here had my adoptive family not decided that they wanted to bring me to their table, to their palace, to have a seat forever. And that's X. That's anonymous me. And I am excited about it whenever I can finish editing, but I believe it tells a story of most adoptees and how they feel. There's a lot of statistical stuff in there about, the number of adoptions and so forth and on, but at the end of the day, it tells our story of our anonymity and yet being found by someone who cares. What prompted me to write this book? Honestly, it was at the time that I was caring for my mom. I had finished my coursework for a doctorate degree that I was working on, and I ran out of money to finish my thesis and graduate with my doctorate in ministry, so I said I needed something else to do. And one day, sitting at my kitchen table, I began to think about X. And I did some research on it. And as I was researching what X meant and what X did and how powerful X is, and we're always solving for that X, I started writing. The chapters, I had already had the chapter titles for years prior to, but didn't do anything with it. And as my mom was getting more and more ill, I spent more and more time writing. And I said, I got to talk about my story, hopefully before my mom leaves me. Unfortunately, I didn't get the book published before she left. And I promised my mom, who was an avid reader, by the way, that I would get the book done and it would be dedicated to her. And actually, the book in the dedication page is dedicated to the parent, to my birth family who gave me life, and my adopted family who gave me life. That's life with a capital L-I-F-E. Because yes, my first family birthed me, but my second family gave me the opportunity to become. And that's who it's dedicated to. And I wanted to write this because it's freeing. It's very cathartic, makes you feel good. Adoption is very much a lifelong journey. Because we never come to the end, we're always solving for X. We're always looking for the next answer. Sure, we may do A plus B equals C. We may do Y minus Z equals X. There's always this X squared, X to the third power. We're always looking to solve the X because there's so many unknown variables within the life and mentality and spirit of adoptees, whether they're children or whether they're adults. It's going to always be. And even those adoptees who know where they came from, they have a connection with their biological family, there's always that unknown, because even in talking to people that I know that are adoptees, that are adults, that have met their biological families, the family members never tell them the whole story. There's always some piece that's left out. You know, you never get the, well, I really did it because. They'll just mask over it and, you know, put a nice bow on it just to make it sound good. But way deep down inside, there's another X that has to be solved for. So you'll go through the rest of your life as an adoptee wondering, what is that X? Do I ever get it solved? Oh yeah, lifelong. Totally. The advice I would give to adoptive parents or those looking to adopt, whether you're a single person or married, is let that child explore on their own. Let them find who they come from if they choose to. And if they come to you and they tell you that they would like to find their first family, help them. Don't just leave them out to meander and find their own way. Help them if you can. Will it hurt you? Probably, but they deserve to know, not to replace you. They deserve to know, do they have health issues? Which is the number one reason why adoptees want to find their first family in the first place, is primarily because of health issues. That child doesn't want to replace you. They're grateful that you selected them to be a part of your home. They're grateful that you allowed them to have a seat at the table. They're grateful that you welcomed them into your heart and into your home. So they're not trying to replace you. They just have questions that you cannot answer. And so to an adoptive family, parents, don't feel bad because you can't answer the questions. Help them find the answers. The advice I would give to adoptees is to be very open with your children. I have 2 grown children. My son's 30, my daughter's 26, and they knew that I was adopted. I told them. However, they are struggling with understanding what that means for me. The only grandparents they knew were my parents, and with both of my parents being deceased, and the cousins that I was raised around and the cousins that they were brought around are scattered all over, have their own families and so forth. There's a lack of family community for my children to try to find their place to fit in. And I see that in me, trying to find a place to fit in. My children are trying to fit in with their family members, and it's not working very well. The difficult piece after my parents passed was what happens to my kids, who that's all they knew. I'm still trying to figure that out. So to adoptees that have children and you lose your adoptive parents, you have to absolutely help your children understand their place. It's not easy. It's hurtful when my son said to me that he didn't have a family and that it was my fault I was adopted. I think I cried for a week. Adoptees, if you're listening, I guarantee you that's something that you may hear down the line one day. You have to own that feeling. It's okay to be angry for a minute. I couldn't talk to my son for a few days because I had to deal with that. No, it's not my fault I was adopted. It's not my fault that my birth mother didn't want me or birth father. And it wasn't my fault that I was picked up by a family and welcomed into a family that had a lot of cousins and relatives, but they would all die off. And now it's just us. To adoptees, I would say, begin to make memories with your own kids and your own family members. Spend time with your children if you have them, grandchildren if you have those, because that's what's going to continue to keep your family cycle going. It was the hardest thing in the world for me to have to bury both of my parents, my adoptive parents. It was the worst trauma I've ever had in my entire life. Outside of everything else that happened, watching my adoptive mother leave me was the worst trauma I ever had. And so now I look to cherish my kids as much as I can. And that's what my advice would be to adoptees that have kids. If I could talk to my childhood self, I would tell my childhood self that identity is not rooted in a home environment. It's not rooted in the four walls with the mother, father, the dog, the cat, and 3.5 siblings. I would tell my childhood self that identity is found within. I always looked for identity from external because I wanted to be a part. I wanted to be accepted. I wanted to fit in. But after I realized that I don't fit in with anyone, I had to start finding that inside. It's even hard now, even for like relationships, because I don't fit in with people. And I ask myself, why? What's wrong with me? And I would tell that childhood person, there's nothing wrong with you. You're perfect just how you are, how God made you to be. And through life experiences, little Terri, you become, capital B-E, come what you're going to be, capital B-E, as you mature through life. As you go through experiences, highs and lows, ebbs and flows, that's who you become. It's not whether you were raised by a single mother, single father, whether you were raised by a black person, a white person, or whomever. I would tell that little Terri that you are okay just how you are. What does adoption mean to me? It means being part of a family, being invited to be a part of someone else's family. Truth be told, you could pick anybody you want or not pick anybody at all. But the mere fact that my family chose to invite me to spend life with them means the entire world to me. At the funeral of my father, my sibling, we didn't get along at all, mind you, but he made one of the most profound statements I ever heard. And if he never says anything else to me again, that's the one thing that I will remember. And he said, he thanked my family for inviting us to share life together. And to me, that's what adoption means. That I get to share a life with someone who wants to share life with me. And will we spend life forever on earth? No. I do have a hope that one day I'll see him in heaven. But for the time being, I got to share life with my family. With these two people who walked into this orphanage and picked me. Granted, my mom said there were hundreds of other kids there, but they wanted me to do life with them. And I will never forget that. I will never forget those words. They allowed me to share life with them, and that, to me, is what adoption means.